anything to do with the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ deserves to stand alone in its own respect and deserves the respect of not being rushed in terms of how to explore that particular seerah. The reason why I say this is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, indeed in the example of the Prophet ﷺ is an example for you. There is a sense sometimes that we read that verse spiritually, that he's an example to us in tahajjud. He's an example to us in prayer. He's an example to us in kindness. He's an example to us in everything that is to do with personal relations. But we forget that ayah also encompasses, he is an example in how we do politics. He's an example in how we manifest politics, and he's an example in how we do politics. And I think that if you look at the ayah through that lens, when you are told by the scholars, legitimately so, that the life of the Prophet ﷺ can be divided into two, pre-hijrah and post-hijrah, 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina, the question then begs itself, the majority of the Prophet ﷺ's life in da'wah is 13 years in Mecca, not 10 years in Medina. But when we often talk about the seerah politically, we don't talk about the first 13 years. We talk about the 10 years because we assume politics is only associated with war, only associated with diplomacy, only associated with having a base, and therefore politics cannot be done until you have an army, economy, a base, and the like. And so when we talked last time about the idea that in Ramadan, it's good to focus on what you think are the victories. Badr, the Khandaq, when the Arab tribes were driven back, Ghatafan and Abu Sufyan and the like, the conquering of Mecca, that the promise of Allah is coming. But I think that there is merit in that when we look at the first 13 years of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that we don't look at it necessarily just from the lens of looking for a spiritual high in the perseverance, but also recognizing the way he moved politically in that period. And my argument in last time was that in looking at the first 13 years, we'll see more parallels with what's happened in the past year in terms of what we've been doing in terms of activism. By we, I'm talking to the people who are watching this and the like, and yourself and the like. I'm not talking about us two over here. So by everybody who's watching this, because everybody, even just by watching it and giving the views and tweeting and the like, they're giving the example. And so when your question is, why did you come back to redo it? It's because while I listed examples on that lengthy piece of time, I missed the examples of, for example, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anh becomes Muslim because of the da'wah of his sister. Because he finds her reading Surah Taha, her and her husband, and he beats her, and then his sister says, at least read it first. He says, what is this? And he opens it and he reads it when he calms down. And he reads, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Taha, ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa, illa tadhkiratan liman yakhsha. Taha, letters from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we did not send this Qur'an as something to cause you panic. We only sent it as a reminder for those who fear, those who ponder about what's coming next, those who fear. When Umar al-Khattab reads that, he says, this could not have come from a man, this comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he goes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he knocks on the door, and his reputation amongst the Muslims is one in which he is violent and oppressive to the Muslims. Because when he knocks on the door and they tell him that it is Umar ibn Khattab, Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an says, let him come in, don't fear him. He won't do to you what he usually does. I'll chop off his head from behind him to make sure he can't harm you like he usually does. When Umar ibn Khattab walks in, radiallahu ta'ala an, he becomes Muslim. I've always pondered when you read this particular story, within the context of when people say, what's the point of you guys just talking in a room? What's the point of Candace Owens doing a podcast on why Palestine? What's the point of Tucker Carlson changing his tune? What's the point? You guys celebrate small victories. I read this story many times, but I read it differently in the context of Gaza while I was reading it when we would sit and discuss. In the sense of when Umar al-Khattab becomes Muslim, Ibn Hisham and the other books of Seerah and Martin Lings and these others, they described that the reaction of the Sahaba was one of takbir. It was one of Allahu Akbar. Can you believe that Umar ibn al-Khattab has become Muslim? Can you believe that he's gone from somebody openly advocating against us, not a neutral, openly advocating against us, to becoming Muslim? And my reaction when I read it in that context of Gaza was not, MashaAllah, how the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab, Subhanak ya Rab, how you did. My reaction was, If this happened today, and Jalal and other people watching and people in this room said, Allahu Akbar, I can imagine someone going on Twitter and tweeting, look at these guys, they get beat up every day, and they just keep protesting in the middle of Mecca and the Kaaba. And when Umar al-Khattab becomes Muslim, one elite, they're celebrating like they've conquered the whole world. Look at how small their ambitions are. Look at how weak these people are. Look at how they celebrate. When I looked at it, I went, Sami, what would your reaction have been? What would you read the story and you realize you're brushing over it? When you initially read it, you go, Subhanallah, like it's a story where everyone in the masjid in the halaqah, they go, Subhanallah, look how Allah flips the hearts. But no one asked the question, if you saw that without the holiness that you've attached to Sahaba and to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you weren't Muslim and you saw that, or rather if you were Muslim and you sort of detached the holiness and elevation and status that they deserve to be given, and you're in the room with them, would it not have crossed your mind and you would say, like, guys, how does this really change anything? Because the next day, Umar al-Khattab goes and announces his Islam in the middle of the Kaaba.
Yeah.
He goes and he says, you know, inshallah, like Sean King finds himself with Umar al-Khattab in Jannah, inshallah, where Sean King says, guys, I'm becoming Muslim. This Gaza thing is intolerable, and I have found the haqq, la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Sean King says it in front of everybody. Doesn't matter about the backlash, doesn't matter of whatever. The next day, Palestinians or the Muslims are still getting beaten up. It's reasonable, rationally, ignore the sense of what is right or wrong. Rash for someone to say, what are these guys celebrating? So when you said, you know, Sami, why'd you come back? Did I do justice in when I was trying to elaborate on how my father taught me to read the Seerah, how I read the Seerah? And I'm hoping in this opportunity, I can do justice, not for the viewer. The viewer is irrelevant, and I don't mean that as a disrespect. The viewer is irrelevant. But I do think, my wife the other day, she asked me, she said to me, by the way, why do you start your answers when Jalal asks you with I think? Every single answer is I think.
Yes.
She said, sometimes when you say I think, people might assume that you're undermining your own analysis. And I told her, Sumayya, I think is not for the audience or for Jalal. I think is my way of saying, Allahumma, I know only you know the ghaib. I know only you know the truth. I know you see what I can't see. And you know with certainty what's happening. You are the one who everything is in his hands. You are the one who controls everything. Allahumma, I dare not claim that certainty that you handle the affairs of this world. Allahumma, accept this word of I think as my recognition of this supremacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I said every answer has to start like this because it's like and I promise I'll finish on this point. In 2019, my father ran in the elections. So I remember
Tunisian elections.
in Tunisia elections. So for the presidency. In 2014, he came fourth. In 2011, his party came third. And I remember 2019, he didn't want to run again. The Tunisia experience was rough, but we pushed him. We said, go run again. You know your values are good. So I remember on his manifesto, he had our party promises to put in the constitution that Islam is the religion of the state and no law may be passed that contravenes Sharia, which was the additional Sharia part. We want an unemployment benefit system. We want free healthcare for those who are unemployed because we have the insurance system. You can't access free healthcare or healthcare unless you have a job. So he's like providing access to healthcare for those who don't have it. So when he went to Tunisia, the strategy was when you go to speak on the media, he would focus on the unemployment benefit, he'd focus on the healthcare, he'd focus on things that would elevate the poor and in society and say that those who did the revolution, they should be supported. So he went on this channel with these two pundits, secular pundits, Habib Bouajila and Burhan Bsayis. And when they asked him about his manifesto, they focused specifically on this Sharia point. They said, what does it mean when you say you want to bring Sharia? You want to chop off hands? What does it mean when you want to bring Sharia? And my father was like, we are Muslims. This should be a no-brainer for us. I'm talking about the justice of Umar al-Khattab. I'm talking about... They said, no. We don't need this stuff here. We are a civil state. We don't need the religion and this and whatever. And what does it mean and whose interpretation, etc. and the like. So anyway, the interview ended up heated. So when he came back, my cousin is telling me the story, my cousin Jalal. He says to me, my father was put in prison when he was 19 and then again when he was 20 and then fled Tunisia. So most of his life he's been outside of Tunisia. So my cousin Jalal, has never known him on a personal level until my father came back for the elections. So my cousin is telling the story and he says, yeah, my uncle, he's talking about my father. My uncle came home. He calls him Ammi. Ammi Jaddar, he came home. And he was sitting with Isam and he was sitting with the other campaign team. And they were analyzing the interview. So the team said to him, yeah, Doctor, we advise that in Tunisia, the issue of Islam and stuff is very contentious with regards to Sharia. So we believe in it, but we think maybe in the campaign, you should avoid talking about this issue. Only talk about the... My cousin Jalal says, Sami, I saw something in my uncle's eyes the moment they said, don't talk about it and put it to the side. As if something went between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, Allahumma, because of their phrasing of it, I will not let it be said that I set aside for the sake of the Tunisian people and for the sake of the election. For wallahi, your rida is greater to me than anything that these Tunisians want. And he went in every interview and would not talk about anything except Sharia and Islam. And it's almost as if he agreed to lose the election. When I heard that story, of course, I was naive politically. Part of me said, my father doesn't understand politics. I mean, sometimes it must be okay, you know, to set aside these things. I'm deeply, deeply ashamed when I admit this. I'm deeply ashamed when I remember how I thought my father should do politics differently. That he should, you know, play the game, that he should whatever. And subhanallah, within a year, 2 years, the coup would happen from Qais Said anyway. And all those who compromised would end up being tossed into prisons. While Allah saved my father and he's not anywhere near the grasp of Qais Said or the like. And I believe it's because Allah rescued him in that particular way. That's my interpretation of it. But the reason why I say this is that ultimately when you read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, I know I've gone along on this particular point. When you read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is Allah going above and beyond to speak to you. Allah sent down the Quran and sent down the book, which is the Quran. And Allah said, this is al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. I have completed this book for you. But it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, let me add the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to it as well. Let me show you how you can live with the Quran. I won't give you just a book. Let me show you how you can live with it. And I wonder if when you read the seerah, if we truly read it, or are we reading it in the sense of we look for the spiritual high in Ramadan. But when you read the parts of the seerah where we see resonance with what we should do politically, we sort of say, leave that aside. That's not for us today. And I think that's the frightening thing that I hope Gaza will change the way in which we approach it this Ramadan.